Hello and welcome to session 263 in the AISafety.com reading group. Tonight we'll be discussing the second part of Counterarguments to the basic AI Xrisk case by Catchup. So Catchup is still the head person in AI Impacts, and today we're going to focus on Counterargument C. Counterargument C is counterarguments to the claim that superhuman AI would be sufficiently superior to humans to overpower humanity. Before we go into this subject, I would like to add a few comments to a particular didactic tool that Catchup is using, which is among each gap in the arguments, she presents a section called "What it might look like if this gap matters." And I've criticized a number of these, and I'll also continue to criticize a few of them in this part. But I would like to talk a bit more about why I think this is a rather bad choice for getting some kind of understanding and intuition. And the key problem, as I see it, is that when you're setting up these kind of scenarios, it's very easy to add a lot of things that don't follow from the arguments themselves. When someone reads these arguments and tries to poke holes in them, then adding these kind of complications that don't actually relate to the arguments in the previous section feels like a non sequitur in a sense. It doesn't follow from the arguments below. And I guess if you're trying to make like a fully fleshed out scenario or something like that, you have to add some things that don't necessarily follow in a strictly logical way. But I think that these complications end up muddying the waters so much that I don't think it's a good idea to have these sections. Right, onto the arguments. The first, human success isn't from individual intelligence. Catchup starts by restating the argument in her own way again, as we saw last time, and in a somewhat suboptimal way. The first is that she writes that the argument claims that passing human level intelligence is the relevant bar. And this is the relevant bar for doing things like recursive self-improvement or doing a number of things, but not explicitly for taking over. For taking over, that is at the super intelligent level, not at the slightly above human level. The best description of the actual arguments for AI Xrisk comes, in my opinion, from the book Superintelligence by Nick Bostrom. And superintelligence is defined as a being more intelligent than any human, however clever. And so we are obviously not talking at a level around the average human. This is a confusion that comes up a number of places in the following text, and I think in general it would be nice if Catchup either used the definitions that AI Xrisk advocates are using or made her own more clear. In particular, to what extent is human success caused by individual intelligence and cultural transmission? I think that's a really, really interesting subject, and a lot could be said about how these two factors map together. But Catchup does not actually go into how these two things work together, and I think it's a shame, and I think it's a shame that it's left somewhat underexplored. I think it may be that there are counterarguments lurking somewhere around there, but Catchup does not go into a discussion about how individual intelligence and culture interact. There's a few other quotes here. The argument claims that something more intelligent than humans will inexorably triumph over humanity. And if any of you have read Nick Bostrom's book Superintelligence, you know that he would certainly never ever in a million years make any claim like that. The word inexorably is not used, and there's a good reason for Bostrom not to use this word. He would couch this in way more disclaimers. And a final, the argument claims that humans triumphed over other species only because of individual intelligence and not culture. This is, on the face of it, obviously irrelevant and obviously almost certainly irrelevant, but very clearly untrue, right? Obviously, human culture was a dramatic part of human success. I don't think anyone would suggest this, and I'm struggling to see how. Imagine that Yudkowsky had written this sentence. Then obviously a lot of people would attack him and say, actually, human culture is a big deal, and they'd be right, of course. And it's very clear that this is the kind of counter arguments that don't work. You are not in general going to find errors in find this kind of totally trivial errors in Nick Bostrom's work or in Eliezer Yudkowsky's work or Paul Cristiano or any of these people, because there has been so incredibly much scrutiny on the arguments. So if you find a counter argument that is really surface level and really obvious, then almost certainly either someone has found them before you, or or you are mistaken, and Nick Bostrom, obviously he wouldn't say this. Now let's go compare a single human compared to like humanity. If you look at someone in the human society that is substantially more intelligent than the average, we could call that a genius, then they basically live in the same way as humans do. Give or take. I think I would give and take a bit more, depending on precisely how you define a genius. A number of geniuses are in fact living in substantially different conditions than average people. I think for unrecognized geniuses, this may in fact be true. But once you are recognized as a genius, most likely you're going to live in a different way than average people. Then there's a true but irrelevant claim that an AI at the human level without access to information from humanity is worthless. Obviously, humans without access to human culture, like children that are lost in the jungle and grow up among wolves or something like that. That's well known. We have a claim that some information cannot be obtained by reading or like YouTube videos or things like that. There are some tacit knowledge. I think it's true, and I think Jessica would probably agree that this perhaps makes very little difference. Then there's a claim that the power an individual has in society is modulated by what role society gives them. And while that is true, I think the relationship is mostly backwards, in the sense that the person who is best at social manipulation will be given the greatest role in human society. So it's not that humanity gives roles out randomly. Humanity tries to give roles based on competencies. We may do a poor job, but that is in fact what we're trying to do. Then there's this question. So I'm just going to read it. A person twice as smart as any other human would research twice as much as an average human, and that's basically nothing. So this question, I tried to read it several times, and I think on balance this claim doesn't make sense. So the question is precisely twice as smart as any other human. What are we talking about here? Twice as smart as any human, that would be like substantially smarter than the smartest person ever, like maybe an IQ of 180 or something like that. That would that person research twice as much as an average human? Well, they obviously would research way more. That would be a true super genius or something like that. So they would be able to, in that case, the claim doesn't make sense. It's also possible to read this claim as just a person that is twice as smart as the average human person. And the average person is probably not like accounting for babies and things like that. We are probably talking about a really low level, and that makes the claim true, but also very irrelevant to the things we're talking about. Catchup has an analogy with the Manhattan Project when it comes to like trying to create technology to obtain a decisive strategic advantage. She claims that people often mistake the actions of a human with the actions of a human society. I think people do in fact make this mistake. People in general make a lot of epistemic errors. And that is why in general you should not engage with with arguments presented by the average person. You should instead try to find the best arguments presented by your opponents and argue against those instead of there's a lot of people who have seen the Terminator movie and they are probably really confused, so don't argue with those. Argue with Nick Bostrom or Yudkowsky or Cristiano or these kind of people. There's the note that even the Manhattan Project was not done in the afternoon, even by the smartest person in the Manhattan Project. That's obviously true. I think in general there are a sliding scale on to what extent projects can be completed by one person having like a eureka moment where they jump out of the bathtub. But a lot of projects involve a lot of hard work, and I think that is in fact a very commonly understood conclusion, that a lot of big projects just require a lot of grit and hard work and man hours. So here we have a counterfactual. If the Manhattan Project was done by entities somewhat smarter than a person, then that wouldn't have changed the project very much. I don't really understand the counterfactual here. Are we again talking about entities smarter than humans in general, like super intelligences, or are we talking about that like everybody in the Manhattan Project gets +5 IQ points or something like that? I think it's unclear what Catchup is pointing at, but I would point to one thing, that the Manhattan Project in practice was when they were building the first atomic bombs, they realized that enriching uranium was the key bottleneck, and they tried to make centrifuges work, and they couldn't make centrifuges work. And then they did some other ways of purifying, enriching the uranium that was a huge amount of work. And then after they finished the Manhattan Project, then they just, of course, we could have done something slightly different and made a Sibber-type centrifuge. And that, of course, that's basically how we've enriched uranium ever since. And that's way smarter. And that would have cut the enrichment process that was super, super arduous down dramatically. So I could, in fact, have seen easily that if some of the people who were designing this had been just slightly smarter, sure, then the Manhattan Project could have happened dramatically faster and at a dramatically lower cost. This is not really my real objection to this argument. My real objection to this is that the Manhattan Project is a very, very strange project. Almost all projects are very, very different from the Manhattan Project. So if you're trying to talk about projects in general, you should probably not assume that any random project is going to be like the Manhattan Project, because in this particular case, we do have a project that is very, very likely to be relevant. So if you imagine someone is building GPT-5, then probably the project to build GPT-5 is kind of like the project to build GPT-4, which is kind of like the project to build GPT-3, that is kind of like the project of building GPT-2, etc. This is, I think, a way more grounded way of reasoning, rather than trying to find, like, the Manhattan Project is in fact known specifically because it's an outlier, because it's a very, very strange project. The next argument is about humans sharing power with AI. Human power is generally something that we obtain, like our power over the environment is not something we obtain through our own individual intelligence, but by buying power from the rest of society using money or something like that. And that means, in general, we should expect AI labor to be sold on some kind of market and not hoarded. And I think that is, in general, a true assumption, except in the specific case where the AI is trying to take over, either because on its own initiative or because it's been built by some evil actor that wants to take over the world. In that specific case, we should not expect AI labor to be sold but hoarded. Then there are arguments against whether humans will transfer power directly to AIs. And I don't think, like, that's not a thing that the original arguments don't really talk about this. I'm aware that there is this movie Terminator where humans voluntarily give the AI control over all the nuclear weapons. But I think that's, again, arguments from the movie Terminator and not arguments from Nick Bostrom. there's the question of a comparison between agentic AI, in how much power that would get compared to a combination of humans and non-agentic machines. First, Cathy Grace correctly notes that human level capability is a moving target and something that could potentially increase dramatically as we get things like tool AI. And that is in fact a complication that Nick Bostrom has already taken into account. In the book Superintelligence, in chapter 4 on the kinetics of an intelligence explosion, Bostrom explicitly talks about this and say, okay, we are anchoring the human capability at the level that it is when AGI reaches the human level or something like that. I think actually he just anchors it at like 2016 level, and then you just multiply by a factor or something like that. So that is how Nick Bostrom gets around this. But I agree, if you don't read Nick Bostrom, but you just try to come up with the arguments yourself, it's easy to overlook some of these complications, and that is indeed a way you can confuse yourself. Now, how much superior are agents going to be compared to humans with tool AI? Well, there are certainly a number of disadvantages, and Catchup lists some of them, but I think in this case the canonical reference would be Gwern's why tool AIs want to be agent AIs. This lays out in substantial details the arguments for why AI agents may in fact be radically superior. Catchup say these arguments may or may not matter much, and obviously I agree in the sense that predicting the future is hard, but I would also say this is not really a counter-argument. To state briefly some of your opponent's arguments and just say this may or may not matter much isn't a counter-argument. Catchup in fact comes up with another argument that tool AIs also have to deal with the interface to humans, which agents do not. I just re-skimmed Gwern's text and I couldn't find it, so I assume that this is like a new argument that Catchup is presenting for why AI agents are going to be even more superior to combinations of humans and non-agentic machines. And the new argument that Catchup presents says it matters for some tasks like rapid interaction with humans, but not for like major on-off decisions. So maybe more for social manipulation and less for strategizing. And again, that doesn't really seem like a counter-argument in the sense that if you present a new argument for a case and then show that the new argument isn't like fully covering, that there are cases where it doesn't apply, that's not really a counter-argument. Then there's the matter of trust, because this may matter in some specific cases. And the case that Catchup has in mind is the case where AI has a slight performance edge over humans. And already in this assumption, I think is a very, very narrow set of assumptions. I think in most worlds and across most tasks, either AI is going to be dramatically superior to humans or dramatically inferior to humans. In particular, the relevant 6 cognitive domains that strategic cognitive domains that Bostrom have identified are very unlikely to be a place where there's like a slight performance edge. And of course, it would be even more surprising if this is stable. If as AI progresses, then humans and tool AI also progresses at precisely the same level, so we get something that's stable over centuries. That sounds really, really, really far-fetched. But if we are in this situation where agentic AI has a slight performance edge over humans with tool AI, then this could be balanced by us not trusting the AI. And there are 2 reasons why we would not trust the AI. The first is we don't know what their values are, and we don't know how they would behave in any given case. I think even in this case, the person who is deciding whether he wants to employ an AI or a human needs to consider the competitive dynamics where these 2 claims don't actually hold for humans either. When you choose to employ a human, you don't actually know what their values are. Maybe they will start a labor union. Maybe they will I don't know, do many different things. And how will humans behave in any given case? Humans sometimes do really strange things. So this also do not hold for humans. And it might in fact be that there's a base rate of humans starting labor unions, and there may be a much lower base rate of AIs starting labor unions. I could totally see that thing happening. And finally, if we don't know that the AI is aligned, then in expectation it's costly to use AI. Again, I'm a bit unsure about what Catchup is talking about here. Is she talking about like this lower level unaligned, or is she talking about takeover scenarios? If it's just the lower level where the AI is actually, breaking vases, trying to clean up or something like that, then in that case we expect more capability to rapidly fix that problem. So it won't be costly in expectation for very long. In the other case where the AI is trying to take over, in that case, obviously, right now, people ought to realize that building AIs is terribly dangerous, and they're doing it anyway. So that is a state of affairs that is likely going to persist, and people will, in fact, generally be unaware of the problems with AI and just blissfully use it until an AI takeover. The next argument is about headroom. Like in a given task, how much can it be done better than what we're doing right now? A classic example is tic-tac-toe, where optimal game performance can be specified relatively easily. Like there is no way to do better than humans in tic-tac-toe. That's just a fully solved game to some extent. And to what extent does this generalize? Well, there are some tasks that probably have only little headroom. If we know what best performance is, if we know that humans can do it almost perfectly, if we can bound how well the task can be done, or there are computational limits or things like that, probably there is little headroom. And probably there's a lot of headrooms in these kind of things. I won't read them up. Catchup doesn't put much stock in this counterargument. Probably for many tasks there's a lot of headroom. But it's not obvious, and I think we should limit our analysis to Bostrom's 6 cognitive strategic tasks. And in these tasks, intelligence amplification, strategizing, social manipulation, hacking, economic productivity, and technological research, in these it seems clear that we're not going to get anything like best performance out of humans anytime soon. And also in this, Catchup has what does the world look like if this gap matters? And she suggests that if there is little headroom above the human level on these tasks, that could lead to a world with a good offense-defense balance. Like defense is a lot easier than offense, and that could lead to stability. That doesn't seem clear to me at all. I don't think that follows at all. Intelligence may not be an overwhelming advantage. And again, Catchup represents the arguments as the argument assumes that any difference in intelligence will eventually win out over any difference in other initial resources. And that's obviously trivially wrong, right? Any difference, like who would say this kind of claim? Like obviously there is a level of difference where if you're a tiny bit smarter, then you can't overcome that that initial difference. That seems really obviously clear. Then she has a claim: the difference in performance between top and average human performance is large relative to difference between average and random. And this seems to me to be, in fact, an argument for why intelligence could be an overwhelming advantage, the way I reach it. So, but at this stage, Catchup is like 3 meter levels deep in counter arguments. That's not meter levels, but 3 levels deep in counter arguments. And I think it's possible that either I misunderstood what she's written, or it seems like she's not, in fact, presenting a counter argument here. I also kind of feel that we're at an enormously high level of abstraction here, and I don't think we can really say a lot meaningfully at this level. So let's talk about GPT-4 or GPT-3 or some of these actual AI projects that are right in front of us, and have a look at those, and we can like measure their performance. We can say a lot of things a lot more concretely, by talking about these. Catchup instead has a digression and a link to a discussion about random chess. Like how well do you play chess if you play random moves? And that is like I tried to follow some of the arguments and the links to that, and I became clearly more confused than enlightened by this. I don't think you can say much about like random chess. It's really, really strange, and you have a really hard time making the other person checkmate in random chess, and it's just really, really strange. Catchup also in this section has an example with like 3 actors, Bob, Charlotte, and David. I think something has gone wrong in the editing to this. I'm quite sure that it's just not just that I'm stupid that is the reason why I couldn't pass it. I think some sentences may have fallen out from that example. Another example, counter argument to why smarter AI may not be able to take over, is that Catchup can provide some examples of intelligence not helping. Elephants are smarter than gnats, but elephants have not won over gnats. And the reason we this is not actually a counter-argument to the arguments as presented, because elephants cannot do the 6 strategic cognitive tasks that we're interested in, and that is precisely the reason why all intelligences at a level where they can't do this are irrelevant. And in a strong sense, elephants and gnats are equal in that they don't have general intelligence. So looking at this world, it seems to Catchup intuitively that the big discrepancies in power in the world are not about competence. I think I would disagree by adding the complication that there is also the competence of your ancestors. So what explains the discrepancies in power that we see in the world right now? It's of course a huge question. And like my intuition is that 40% is about individual competence, 40% is the competence of your ancestors, and 20% is luck. So I think, in fact, the discrepancies in power that we see right now are mostly about competence. And there's another example. People with an IQ of 130, they earn $6,000 to $18,000 more per year compared to average IQ people. It's obviously an example of intelligence literally helping, and literally helping substantially. It would be a lot clearer if that was expressed in percentage rather than in absolute numbers, also because some of these are very old. I looked through some of her references, and I think the actual number is substantially larger than this. And I think the key problem is that they are controlling for a lot of things, like who do you marry, do you divorce, do you like what kind of education do you take? And if you're controlling for education, then you're taking a lot of the difference between IQ 130 and IQ 100 people out. Because people who have an IQ of 130 are much more likely to finish an advanced education. There's another reference, yes, where politicians appear only slightly more intelligent than others. I looked at the paper. It is a substantially smaller scoped paper. I don't think you can use it for this kind of sweeping generalizations. There's a link to it's a draft. The figures haven't been put in. The conclusions say that there's a strong positive selection in politicians, in fact, being more intelligent than others. It's based on some kind of army measuring system in Sweden, where they see like, are people likely to going to be intelligent and strong and good infantry, good soldiers, and also good leaders. And I think it was actually somewhat interesting to me that to predict whether you will be a successful politician and get elected, it's better to be intelligent rather than the army says you could make a good officer. And I think that's actually very counterintuitive. I would expect the thing that makes you a good officer to be the same thing that makes you a a good politician, or substantially more than just being smart. But apparently the paper found that it is slightly more important to be smart in order to get elected rather than to be a good leader. Another example of intelligence not working is Mensa, an organization for people with genius level IQ. And obviously people with Mensa, I think it's trivially obvious to say that Mensa represents a very, very specific subset of the people with an IQ over 130. And I think there's a social dynamic around Mensa that really, really muddies the water and makes this some horribly evidence. Like the people are not joining Mensa because it's perceived as socially very, very bad to join Mensa. Not because it wouldn't help in any way. Intelligence appears to be more useful for showing off than for strategic action. This might be true, but that doesn't bound really how useful it is for strategic action. It may be useful for both. And we have Catchup also mentions that this may just because there's some winner-takes-all dynamics in a lot of appearance-based sports and competitions and things like that. Catchup also have some anecdotes of intelligent people who don't appear to be helped by their intelligence. You can counter anecdotes with more anecdotes, but I couldn't actually be bothered to find examples of successful intelligent people. I think we can all agree that there are a lot of examples of intelligent, successful people, so just pretend that I gave a list of anecdotes here to counter Catchup's anecdotes. It is unclear that many goals realistically incentivize taking over the universe. I think this may in fact be in the wrong section. Remember, we are doing counter-arguments to whether superhuman AI would be sufficiently superior to humans to overpower humanity. And in this case, this is whether you actually want to do that, and that is like a different question to my mind. Catchup uses herself as an example. She doesn't try to take over the universe, and I explicitly think this is mostly for lack of ability. No offense to Catchup, but she doesn't have a feasible path towards taking over the universe. If you imagine she had one, like she's given a magical safe that has a take over the universe button inside, then sure, I expect her to go lockpicking because to try to get that safe open. Because taking a button that would allow Catchup to take over the universe and have everything done, everyone follow her commands or something like that, would probably be really, really useful to her. And taking over the universe as a subset for your goal, that seems really laughable for almost any human goal. I don't in fact think that this is laughable. I think it is only because it appears so hard to take over the world, and that hasn't actually stopped people. There are a lot of people who have in fact tried to take over the world, and to these people it hasn't been laughable. It has been the most likely path to success to try to take over the world. So the question is, how much easier would it be for an AI? Here at this point I would like to have a standard reference would be Bostrom source of advantage for digital intelligence, but it's been written in many other places. There's a lot of people who have showed scenarios and this kind of thing. Catchup doesn't really show gaps in this argument as much as just posing the question and not making any reference to the answers, and just putting a question mark to that. Another empirical question is the quantity of new cognitive labor. How much will it be? Well, if we assume it comes out to just a peak human, then that is not enough to take over the world. If we say it's like 1 million humans, then it probably can. I'm not actually sure that 1 million is sufficient. 1 million AIs versus 8 billion humans, that's not trivial, even if you have good coordination. It may be possible, but it's not trivial. But we assume that computers get faster and faster, and algorithms get better and better, and we get more and more larger projects with more, what's it called? This process where you get the learning curve. You get better and better AI cognitive performance over time. And I think that is, in fact, the key part of the the answer to this question. That already now we can ask, how much does it cost to run this ChatGPT-3 and have it compose like a college essay compared to having a human compose this college essay? And of course, we are already strongly past the point where if you want to make a million college essays cheaply, you would obviously use GPT-3 and you would obviously not have humans do that task. And there's a claim that if we assume that we have AIs gradually entering society, so we have a period of some AI presence but at a low level, then when the AI takeover happens, if it happens, then Catchup claims that because we have had a period of time with AI being gradually introduced, then the eventual takeover, the coup, would be more slow moving. I don't think that follows at all. I think it's very possible to have a very, very gradual introduction of AI combined with a coup that takes like milliseconds. The speed of intelligence growth, that is claimed to be ambiguous. I don't think ambiguous is the right word here. I think the word is uncertain. I don't think there is a lot of ambiguity in the concept. I think there is a lot of uncertainty about how fast a takeoff would happen. And the fact that it's uncertain how fast it would happen is not something that the arguments would disagree with. Like Bostrom say it's more likely than not that the takeover is fast. Yudkowsky has explicitly said that he believes that everything that he only really predicts what happened above the level of atmospheric turbulence. And I think I also personally agree, we won't know this in advance. So how could an intelligence explosion happen? One of the key ways is recursive self-improvement. Catchup wrote an article in 2018 with Counterarguments, and I made a presentation just like this with counterarguments. But I would say that 2018 is a long time ago. And like when Catchup expressed uncertainty about in 2018 about how would technology develop, I think it was prudent and it was correct of her to express uncertainty, but it's not 2018 anymore. Like we literally have Transformers in our hand right now, and we can see that Transformers can do things that a lot of people in 2018 were skeptical would be possible at this level. So I think like we have learned something, and I'm sure Catchup has also updated substantially since 2018. The second reason to suspect an intelligence explosion is by analogy with the primate to human evolution. That suggests any movement past human level will take us to unimaginably superhuman level. Again, like unimaginably superhuman if you just go a bit above the human level. It seems like obviously as a silly strawman, right? No one would claim this. It's also not very much a part of the intuition behind the intelligence explosion. Nick Bostrom, in his argument, does not refer to this at all. I think in the AI FOOM debate, Yudkowsky makes a few small, weak, I think he explicitly calls them weak references to this. Catchup says if she hears strong arguments exist for why we should expect an intelligence explosion. If she finds them, I would be very interested in seeing them. I have actually heard the opposite, that there are no strong arguments for whether or not an intelligence explosion would happen. Finally, some of the key concepts are vague. In particular, control, which is a rather central part in an AI takeover scenario, is not zero-sum. Catchup doesn't go into it more than this, but I think it's an interesting question, and I'd like to go more into it. And of course, depending on how you define control, if you define it as like control over nature, that could increase. You could imagine you have like an entropy-based definition of control. In that case, you could also see the total amount of control increase. I think the arguments, like, I'm not going to say that Nick Bostrom is perfect. I think almost certainly you could make things more precise. You could make things more mathematically rigorous. But on the other hand, I also feel that control is a real thing. And my intuition for why this is a real thing is that the sense that there are many different kinds of definitions you can come up with, and they all imply each other. So if you have control among one of these definitions, then you have control among all of them. So here are 5 definitions of what control means in this specific scenario. So Nick Bostrom has the definition of decisive strategic advantage. People often use control as like having economic and political power dominance, or the ability to influence your light cone, the ability to kill others and not get killed, and influencing and directing others, as the dictionary says. And I think in all these cases, having a totally dominant and strategic level of control, like if you are perfect at influencing the light cone, you can get a decisive strategic advantage. And if you have perfect political and economic power, then you can influence and direct others to any level required. That is all for today. Thank you and see you next time.